Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Kelly Montana. I'm the assistant curator here at the Menil Drawing Institute, and I'm really thrilled to see so many of you here with us tonight. Before I begin, I'd like to remind everyone to silence or even consider airplane mode your cell phones, please. We are recording this talk, and it will be posted online in the coming weeks. I'm delighted to be hosting this event, a lecture by Ellen Lupton, in conjunction with our exhibition, Draw Like a Machine, Pop Art 1952 to 1975. The show is overwhelmingly drawn from the museum's permanent collection, with key loans from collectors based here in Houston, some of whom are with us this evening. The exhibition galleries will remain open for a brief period after the talk ends for anyone that would like to visit. And we are especially grateful that Ellen could travel from Maryland to be here with us tonight. There will be time for a short Q&A following her presentation, and please hold your questions until then. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Ellen Lupton. Ellen is a writer, curator, educator, and designer. She is the Betty Cooke and William Steinmetz Design Chair at the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore and the Senior Curator of Contemporary Design at the Hewitt, the Smithsonian Design Museum in New York. Her newest exhibition at the Hewitt is Design and Healing, Creative Responses to Epidemics. A prolific writer, her recent publications include the co-authored Extra Bold, a feminist, inclusive, anti-racist, non-binary field guide for graphic designers, and her texts Mother Tongue, the script of Julia Warhol, and How Posters Work were especially critical for me in the exhibition on view this evening. I returned to them time and again. For me, the through line in Ellen's work is how she closely attends to the journey we are all on with the often overlooked yet often necessary things of our lives. She unpacks with incredible specificity why an object or an image makes you feel joy, frustration, or total indifference. And her work always assures that you know it is a person that designed it, they made it with intention, and they are quite literally shaping your world. In short, Ellen's mind is an exciting one that I am sure will make you see much of it anew. And I will turn it over to her. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Ellen Lupton.
Thank you, Kelly. It was so much fun to see this show. It's a real delight to be here, so thank you. So my lecture title looks a little bit like a basic design lesson. You know, we start with lines, and then we do dots, but then all of a sudden we're like sex and politics, right? That's how it works. I'm a graphic designer. I'm not an art historian, but I love art, and I loved looking at all the beautiful works on paper with Kelly today. And everything I do in the field of design somehow comes back to how things are made. I'm just really interested in that. It often interests me more than what it means. Sorry, right? Basic design. So we're going to start talking about these lines, and this is from Andy Warhol's early career. He was a very successful commercial illustrator for the first decade of his career in New York City. And he studied commercial art at the Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh, now Carnegie Mellon University. And when he was in school, he set upon himself the challenge to invent his own line. Because if you were going to be a commercial illustrator, you had to have your own line. And I think this gets to some of the ironies and fascinating contradictions in Kelly's show of how commercial art, although it was created for reproduction, had at its basis these hand processes, and that even when the graphic artists were striving for something more mechanical, there's still these hand processes at the bottom. And so how did Andy Warhol make his very special line? Well, he created this process where he would make a drawing on tracing paper And then on the back of the tracing paper, he would ink it with wet India ink, and it was hinged to a nice piece of illustration board. And then he would press the two things together in order to create this print. And so what you see on the left in each case is the print, the final drawing, and what you see on the right is the ink original, which oddly enough, it has like more detail and more depth, and it's fascinating to me that often in the print, some of the character actually disappears. And what he was trying to create was this very distinctive line that has little gaps and blobs in it. And another advantage of this method is that it was very easy to photomechanically reproduce. So in all the reproduction methods of the era, including today, a pure black line on a white ground is easiest to print. And so to make his unique line, it also had to be very print-friendly. So the line is kind of printed, and it's kind of drawn, and it's kind of there, and it's kind of not there. Parts are missing, but they're missing by accident. And it's a kind of wonderfully Warholian design. And often his assistants would actually do the inking, and sometimes the entire drawing for him. And this is in the 50s when he was a commercial illustrator. Later, of course, we know he had a factory. But really, the factory started in his townhouse in Manhattan, where he lived with his mother, and where his assistants often helped him with the drawings, and learned how to do the process that he invented when he was a college kid. And so I found some examples, and there are many, where he applied this drawing style to commercial pieces. He did a lot of book covers, which are really wonderful. And here's one where he likely also did the lettering. And there's a wonderful integration of the lettering and the illustration and the kind of textured background. He did many book covers, and you can buy these for not too much money. It's a kind of fun collector's pieces if you're into that. This one, most likely another designer added the type. I don't see any evidence in Warhol's work that he knew how to do typography per se, but it's quite beautifully integrated into this wonderful drawing, and you can see his line, right, his distinctive signature line. He had a couple of other lines as well, but this is the one that he's most known for, and there's wonderful examples of it in the exhibition, which is really fun to see. He certainly didn't design the book cover. He did the illustration, and another designer would have reversed it, created this dramatic layout with it. And in this case, using this typewriter type to create that feeling of rawness and roughness that goes with the line. And this is always a challenge for graphic designers working with illustration, is how do you make illustrations look okay with type? Because type is hard and fixed and has sharp edges, and often looks really bad with illustrations. So kudos to this uncredited designer who actually did the cover design featuring the illustration. And sometimes we can look inside the books and see who designed it with Andy Warhol. So here's a book cover with this image of a piano on the cover, but the designer has really taken that illustration and turned it into this, photo montage, essentially. And inside the book is Andy Warhol's drawing, kind of left as it is. So really cool. And this cover is lettered by Andy Warhol's mother, Julia Warhola, who did much lettering during this period there in the townhouse where the studio was and where she and Andy lived and where everybody worked, creating these things. And that's Andy and Julia together, a really, beautiful and moving picture. And he kind of credited her in a way. He would sometimes credit her as Andy Warhol's mother, including getting a prize from the Art Directors Club of New York, which went to Andy Warhol's mother. So if you're a mother, as I am, it's kind of getting credit. It's kind of being erased yet again, right? And Andy Warhol, during this commercial period, created these wonderful promotional books that were sent out to clients and friends as Christmas gifts. And this was a very common practice for commercial artists at the time, and even today, some of us still do that. Usually it's some ugly GIF, and always sent on New Year's Day, not Christmas. And this one is entirely illustrated and lettered by Julia Warhol. And this beautiful cookbook, which was commercially produced and was co-authored with Susie Frankfurt, features Andy Warhol's illustrations of outrageous gourmet food, as it was called at the time. And they were really making fun of these extravagant recipes. And all of the lettering is by Julia Warhol. And you could even get it as press type. So if there are any survivors of the pre-digital graphic design industry in the room, press type was a way to create typesetting when you didn't have the money or time to send it out and get galleys made and cut them up and paste them on a board. And so this press type actually features Julia Warhol's lettering. It is quite cool. And I wish we could still get it, but this is not easily found. Okay, let's talk about dots. So dots are a big feature of pop art. And of course, they're a big feature of commercial graphic design. And Andy Warhol started using enlarged dots in these silkscreen paintings, the series called Most Wanted Men from 1964. And the paintings were originally an installation on a building in the New York World's Fair of 1964. And they were very big, and you would see them from a great distance, and you wouldn't see the dots. And they were painted over almost immediately. They were considered scandalous. A man wanting men, and they're criminals. It could not be. But then Andy Warhol made these paintings to show in a gallery using the exact same screens, and he saw that the dots were big and looked cool. And it became a big part of his style. And these are halftone dots. So taking a newspaper photograph or any kind of reproduced photograph and blowing it up. So he made visible this texture that is designed to go away, right? That you're not supposed to see. And now you can see it even more. It's so beautiful. And it's a technical process. It was invented in the 1880s, and it is all around us, and we don't see it. But Andy Warhol helps us see it by making it big. And he was not the first person to do that, of course. There were other artists who had done it, and others who had done it in a commercial context, and I thank Blake Gopnik for his wonderful article, What the Dots Mean in Andy Warhol's Pop Art, for this beautiful book cover for Arthur Rimbaud's Illuminations, designed by Andy Warhol's friend, Ray Johnson, for New Directions Press, which was one of Andy Warhol's clients. And so he likely saw it, maybe, maybe not, but I love these two beautiful men together in dots. Gorgeous. This is a much older poster. This is from 1934. And it's a poster by Zonti Shavinsky, who was a student at the Bauhaus and left Germany in the early 30s to go to Italy, where he became a very successful graphic designer and did fantastic commercial work for Olivetti and many other companies. But he also did this poster for Mussolini with dots. And it's quite a striking use of the halftone to illustrate really the theory of fascism. So we have the head of the charismatic leader sitting on a body made up of the masses of the people, right? So his power comes from the devotion of the mass. And a photographic halftone, its unity, comes from the invisible dots, right? Whose individuality is erased in the name of the larger image. And Shavinsky, in this amazing poster, sort of brings the dot into visibility many years before Andy Warhol or Ray Johnson. But there were others who did it too. And now there's Roy Lichtenstein, who made a different kind of dot, not a halftone dot, but dots that are all the same size. And this is called a Ben-Day dot. And wow, more big dots. And Ben-Day dots are used not in photography, but for reproducing illustrations, and particularly comic books and maps and fashion illustrations. And the Ben-Day dot is designed to disappear. And it was also invented in the 1880s and is all around us, and yet we do not see it. But now we see it because Roy Lichtenstein made it big. And so these are two very different dots with a very different texture and a different impression upon us. And Roy Lichtenstein, he really made this his signature. And he made something visible that we had never noticed before. And in fact, he made the word Ben-Day dot like part of conversation, right? Like, don't you walk around and talk to people about Ben-Day dots? Well, it's because of Roy Lichtenstein, not because, Jack about graphic arts production, right? So, what is it anyway? If you do some internet searching, as we are prone to do, you will find definitions like this from the MoMA website, incorrectly hyphenated, because Ben-Day was a person, not a hyphenation. And we see some examples under there. Some of them are by Roy Lichtenstein, and they have Ben-Day dots, but the others are halftone dots. Okay, so we got to get serious about this because they're very different dots. And if you go on Grove Art Online, you learn again about a guy who used Ben-Day dots in the 60s, right? And not the whole history of how this actually has changed commercial printing. It's his brand, right? The Ben-Day dot became equated with Roy Lichtenstein over and over. It's fascinating. He owns it. But what went on before? So I wanted to learn more about what really is a Ben-Day dot. And I knew I couldn't rely on art historians for this because they don't really care about graphic arts production. They care about Roy Lichtenstein. So I had to go to the source, which is a guy named Legion of Andy, who has an obsessive, excellent, beautifully footnoted and researched website that goes on for page after page after page about Ben-Day dots. And I will not get too deep in the weeds, but just to show you, like, Ben-Day dots have a lot of variety. They were created with this physical screen, this physical invention that actually required an enormous amount of hand skill to apply to drawings. This device, a contraption that would be attached to this lithographic stone at a slight distance from the surface, and then a stylus would press the greasy, inked, dotted piece of celluloid to the stone and leave an impression. And it was, quite an involved technique that was used for over 100 years, really, in exactly the way that Mr. Benjamin Day Jr. intended it. You would mask out the part of the drawing that didn't get dots. And they weren't just dots, they were lines. And here's a beautiful, so all kinds of, different textures, some of them emulating the more handmade stipples of copperplate engraving, and some of them very regular. And in the mid-20th century, those regular dots became more popular because of the presence of halftone printing being so ubiquitous that you really wanted your Ben-Day dots to look more photographic and less like old-time printmaking. And this is what the Ben-Day department looked like in an engraving studio in Chicago in 1921. So lots of guys hunched over equipment, working hard at creating this invisible texture. You could put it on anything. And then by 1960, the process was quite a bit different. It was done with layers of acetate and with a different technical process that anybody who's really excited can ask me exactly how that worked, because now I know, because I am into Legion of Andy. The new process was cheaper, and it was mostly done by women. Whoops, keep going too fast. And one of this is for comic book production. These studios, they were called color separators, and one of the companies referred to his employees as old ladies who worked for minimum wage. And these were the women who were responsible for translating all of the colors in a comic book into Ben-Day dots. So Roy Lichtenstein didn't know anything about that, or how to make color separations, or how a comic book was actually produced. He had to invent his own quasi-mechanical way to get these dots onto a drawing or onto a canvas. I never thought about it before, so thank you, Kelly Montana, because now I will never get it out of my head. How did Roy Lichtenstein get those dots on the canvas? Like Andy Warhol, we know. He just blew up the photograph and made those dots bigger, but Roy had to think of a way to get perfect uniform dots onto a canvas. Now, the people at Life magazine were very interested in this question too, and they published this article in 1964, "Is he the worst artist in the US?" ? Wow, imagine that being your article in Life magazine. And they wanted to know, Roy, how do you make the dots? And how do you get these big comic books to be on the canvas? And so he took them step by step through the process and actually showed how to create this very famous painting that, where is my image duplicator? And so he would start with a little comic book, and he would make his own sketch. And all the art historians are very into pointing out that he changed the sketch and made it better. It was transformation, and it's true. He designed it. He made it like more crisp, neat, beautiful design. And he blew it up with a projector, which was a common way to make things big. Projector, source material. And then he masked out the part of the painting that wasn't going to get dots, and he used a piece of perforated metal as a stencil and forced paint with a toothbrush through the stencil onto the canvas. Now, some 15 years earlier, Jackson Pollock also had his own article in Life magazine. And his process was a little more heroic, right? A guy with a cigarette, dripping house paint on the floor, squatting, versus Roy with a toothbrush and a stencil on a table. What a drag. Anyway, I had to go look at what Pollock's magazine article looked like as well. Really beautiful. Graphic design, amazing. Love it with the frieze, and there he is looking so manly against his canvas. But then where are the photographs of Jackson Pollock doing his masculine shit on the floor? That's what that looks like. Okay. At least Roy got his own spread, right, without any ads. And so the pop artist kind of took that part, the feminized part, the mass media part, and said, you know what, let's do that instead. And so, amazing quote by Roy Lichtenstein, it was almost acceptable to hang a dripping paint rag like Jackson Pollock. Everyone was accustomed to this. The one thing everyone hated was commercial art. Right? So he took the ads, which nobody liked. Comic books. Everybody actually likes comic books, but not the comic books that Roy picked. The romance comic books, those were for girls. And he really tried to recreate that texture. An amazing piece by Molly Nesbitt, sort of taking apart the different quality of dots, right? How did Roy learn to do beautiful dots? So these are kind of rough. These dots are in the exhibition, and it's fabulous to look at them up close. I love this drawing. And these he made by rubbing. So he found a screen that had a nice kind of dot texture to it and rubbed it to get that dot feeling. And we can see that in some of his drawings. But it's not perfect, doesn't really look printed. And he really wanted to capture that feeling of print and got a much better effect with these stencils, these perforated stencils that he could push paint or graphite through the holes and get more mechanical dots, which now we know is an extremely labor-intensive hand process, whether you were doing it as Roy Lichtenstein or as an old lady in New Jersey working for a color separator. It was a laborious hand process. So it gets slicker and more perfect. And then he would make collages where he would have his own papers made with these nice enlarged dots to kind of work more quickly. And graphic designers use these sort of materials too, rub downs and stick-ons that would allow you to put dots directly on your illustrations without having to work with the old ladies in New Jersey. The graphic design world responded immediately. They just loved it. They saw themselves reflected, but in a cool way, And almost immediately we see commercial graphic design with big dots. This is from 7-Up, 1975. And that identity was actually created by Thomas Miller, a designer at Morton Goldshaw Associates in Chicago, who created this amazing identity for 7-Up that really has his own take on dots. So his dots aren't just Ben-Day dots blowing up, they're electric lights, and they're soda bubbles. They're the Uncola. They're so cool. And so another take on the dot. And then, of course, many artists were using the enlarged halftone dot, which was, just often for expedience, because if you had a little tiny picture that you got from a magazine, and you want to make it big, the dots are going to get big, and you can make that beautiful and part of the aesthetic of your work. And I think the pop artists really opened up that idea, that availability of making the dot visible, and having that be acceptable, having that be part of the texture of the thing. And then there were political designers, activists, who were simply doing it out of pure expediency, where the newspaper image is what you have, and it has that texture of media. Emory Douglas was the Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party in the 1960s, and he used these beautiful Ben-Day dots in all the front covers and back covers of the Black Panther magazine, and used them to beautiful effect, and definitely amplifying that texture of the dot and letting it be seen, letting the invisible be seen. And this spectacular piece of original artwork from the collection of Merrill C. Berman lets us see Emory Douglas working and see how he put together this mechanical artwork for the Black Panther magazine. And he would have used one of these stick-on or rub-down dot patterns to fill in his illustration, which is cut out and pasted on acetate over the mechanical board of the magazine, using a product such as that. Now we have all these as digital products, which are fun. Okay, lips. I love the lips in this exhibition. And this work by Idelle Weber was really illuminating to me. I had not seen her work before. And this little drawing in the show is really about the size of a comic book cover. And it is covered with lips, which are rubber stamped onto the surface. And then this silhouette of a salary man is painted on top of it or under it, obliterating the lips. And so this idea of the lips as a kind of trace and a print of female conquest, of the sexual mark that a woman puts on another person, is a big trope in comic book art and movies and, pulp fiction. And her work creates these kind of iconic images of New York work life. And here's some comic books playing with this trope where, the lipstick print as a kind of body print, mechanical print created by this ink, right, this sexualized ink on the face, is evidence of infidelity, it's evidence of sexual conquest, it's the signature, right, the unique mark of the woman. And not always a woman. There are beautiful drawings of Andy Warhol's friend Jean Swenson in the exhibition, which make incredible, detailed, sensual focus on the lips of the model. in some cases, really taking over the whole drawing, becoming what the drawing is all about. And Andy Warhol also did portraits of his friend Otto Fenn wearing lipstick. And then there are his amazing images of Marilyn Monroe and her lips. And my friend Michael Dooley, who's a graphic designer, did this research showing the origins of some of Andy Warhol's lip fascination in this magazine cover by Herbert Bayer, who was a graphic designer from the Bauhaus, one of my fave guys, who came to New York and was an art director and designer in New York. And Andy Warhol maybe saw this, maybe traced it, maybe used it as the basis of this this icon that he drew this over and over through his career, even up until the 80s, this woman's face repeated that may have come from Herbert Bayer. And this beautiful printed book from 1964 of just the lips, right? And the kind of frightening intensity of the lips. Okay, flags is my last chapter. This is Jasper Johns' first painting of a flag in a period when he was discovering this idea of creating paintings of, quote, things seen and not looked at, not examined, right? So we've just been looking at dots designed not to be seen, not to be examined, but blown up and exposed. And for Johns, things like a flag or a letter or a number or a target were these things that have no scale, you don't have to make a picture of, right? It is what it is. And so he made these paintings. It's not a picture of a flag, it is a flag, right? It is the graphics of a flag rendered in his own materials. And this is a very precise copy by a fascinating artist named Sturtevant, and this is in the show here, where she meticulously recreated Jasper Johns and other people's works using the exact materials that they had used in the precise scale. So is it a picture of the painting or is it just the painting, right? And the flag comes up a lot in the exhibition, sometimes as Americana, as a trinket, right? As a little thing, like at a parade, right? A toy. And in the 1960s, many graphic designers made political posters based on the flag, and I think they were directly referencing Jasper Johns and making the poster simply be a flag. So not interpreting the stars and stripes as a motif, but really recreating the flag, but infusing it with this political content at the scale, at the proportion of the real thing, right, of the actual flag. This one is stunning. And in 1969, Jasper Johns was asked to do a poster of a flag to raise money for the anti-war effort. In a way, I think his is less interesting because it has this big caption underneath. And maybe the gallery owner added that or something. It just seems to take away from the purity of the idea of the thing being the thing and not having this edge around it. This is a poster by Faith Ringgold from 1970, and she did it advertising a show at Judson Church in New York City called the People's Flag Show, which was an open call, unjuried exhibition where any artist could submit artwork using the American flag and contesting the laws against desecrating the flag. And so she's created a poster that is the flag, that is the shape of the flag. And she's a fascinating, amazing artist who used graphic design in her work because it was useful, but also to create low-cost art that people could buy. And I'm very proud to say that Cooper Hewitt is in the process of acquiring this and several other posters by Faith Ringgold. And they make, I think, a really beautiful kind of final chapter to this story about drawing and reproduction. 3 of the artists who were exhibited in this exhibition were arrested for desecrating the flag. And this was the painting, one of the 2 paintings that she exhibited in that show in 1970. The Flag is Bleeding. And that's Faith Ringgold in the exhibition with these artworks around her. And there's Abby Hoffman with a cock that's a flag. And 3 artists were arrested, including Faith Ringgold, who became known as the Judson Three, for their confrontation with the flag. There's another Faith Ringgold poster that Cooper Hewitt is acquiring. It's called United States of Attica, and it's about violence against prisoners in all the states of the U.S. and other violence against black people by the state violence against black people. It's an incredible poster, and Cooper Hewitt is really proud to be acquiring this from Faith Ringgold. And it speaks to a history of such posters, including this one, this work led by Ida B. Wells, who did this map studying lynching in the United States and was used as evidence in promoting an anti-lynching law in the US Congress and Senate. So graphic design doing stuff. There's another beautiful poster by Faith Ringgold, and it's using these 2 colors that are very close in value, the purple and green. And it reflected a theory, a color theory that she was developing at the time that she called black light. And of course, that was a psychedelic kind of term. Some of us had black lights in high school to make things glow and look cool. And so she was drawing on that psychedelic meaning, but she wanted to use these intense colors, deep and dark and jewel-like, and close together to celebrate the beauty of black skin. And so this poster, here we can see the physicality of how it's made with cut paper. The poster is building on this painting that she did in 1969, also using lettering, but in this case it's an oil painting with these very close in value colors. And she did portraits in this series. I love these where the figures are cropped like magazine photographs. Or this beautiful portrait of a black man with these intense, rich colors, exploring this color theory of black light. And it's a theory not unlike what the psychedelic poster artists of San Francisco were doing with their silkscreen posters celebrating the experience of rock and roll, often using colors that were very close in value, an idea that was taught by Joseph Albers in his basic design classes at Yale, where Victor Moscoso was a student. So this high modern Bauhaus design theory became the basis of trippy psychedelic posters. And to see this interpretation of it with a different register and a different seriousness and meaning behind it, I think is a beautiful way to end the evening. Thank you.
Would you like to take some questions, Ellen?
Sure.
Okay. So just raise your hand, I'll bring a mic around to you.
Hi.
This is more of an observation that I wanted to ask you about, but the 2 articles about Pollock and, were the titles intentionally referencing each other?
Well, I would think so. So the Pollock article's from 1949, and the title was, "Is he the greatest artist in America?" And then 15 years later, Roy's article, "Is he the worst artist in America?" I would think that the good people at Life magazine were playing on that, and the article about Pollock was, so popular and so upsetting to people. My 6-year-old could do that. Right, it just enraged people that would be considered art, but also was obviously fascinating and world-changing. And pop art enraged people too. And your 6-year-old couldn't do it because it's actually really hard. Harder than it looks. And I have to say, I never really thought about how did Roy Lichtenstein make his paintings. And it's quite a challenge to make things look like a machine made them. And he would go in and retouch the dots if they weren't right. In the replicator one, whatever it's called, duplicator, you can see how he's added, let me just get to it. Well, I don't remember where it is, but he actually adds, paints highlights on the eyes, which I don't think is legitimate.
Yeah, I have to follow up on that Lichtenstein
Yeah.
kind of observations. Was the origin of his kind of work really where he was inspired by aesthetics and style of commercial graphics such as comic books? Therefore, kind of the subject matter of comic books and advertisements just followed suit through that, or was he really, inspired by, kind of statements that commercial work was saying about society, and he was trying to show a lot of the work with the romance comic books about women and their relationship with men, and just to be consistent. If that was he was reading, he was inspired, or the advertisements, that the dot, the Ben-Day dot, was just something that seemed to suit what he was seeing and was inspired by what the subject matter was. So was it style before the subject, or did they go together, or was he really just interested by what all the media was communicating about society, and then as a result, that's where the style came from?
I think it has to be both. If he was just interested in the subject matter, he would have had a different result. And I think he understood the subject matter to be debased, right? That it wasn't serious. Even comic book people didn't like these comics, So they were already out of date and seen as the decline of the art of comics, right? They were the worst comics ever. And those were the ones that he picked. Or the washing machine. Right, nobody likes the washing machine. This is not anybody's idea of a good time. So he's choosing something, feminized, which immediately makes it not cool, right? This is women's stuff. And it's hard for me to imagine that he likes the subject matter, or that he even ever did any laundry, for that matter. Right, he probably had the privilege of other people doing his laundry. So he's making fun of this culture, but also enjoying it, right? And the irony is that people love those comic book paintings. People that maybe didn't like the comics themselves loved the paintings. They were just, I love these paintings. Yeah.
This might be kind of a bloated question, but do you think that right now is a good time for pop art to, kind of be revitalized? Because for example, with Warhol, a lot of his paintings were of celebrities and advertisements.
Mm-hmm.
And, since we're constantly on our phones now,
Uh-huh.
see like hundreds of advertisements like every day. So like, wouldn't it be interesting to see like new artists take that and, I don't know, bring it back?
I think so. I think artists are bringing it back. I think there's incredible richness in figurative painting, especially African American painters, portrait painters, and figurative painters. I wouldn't call them pop artists, but I think there's a way in which pop art never died. It sort of brought the image back and allowed it to be interrogated as media and as a product of society, and not like a window onto the world, but something processed and mediated and subject to capital and monetization and all that. So I think pop art is being revived. I like your question. Thanks.
I was struck by that a lot of the source material they're looking at actually seems to be it's not contemporary to when they're working. It actually seems to be about 20 years before. Just looking at, Andy Warhol, looking at the magazine from the 1940s. These ads don't necessarily look, they look like they come from the Jackson Pollock 1940s magazine. I'm curious if you have any thoughts of that, and if that's something you saw as well. For example, Lichtenstein's comics, were those contemporary to when he was?
I think they were contemporary. It's just that they weren't the comic at its essence. So like even comic book artists, there's a great article by Adam Gopnik about this. But even the comic book artists who had to do those romance comics all dreamed of getting another job. And the other job was doing superhero comics. So like these were, I think the reason they look like they're out of date is because they were what teenage girls read. They weren't the hardcore comic art that comic aficionados were committed to.
Okay.
Good? All right. Thank you
Ellen.
very much. It was super fun. Dots.